Hi, everyone. Today is Erev Yom Kippur. Just in a few hours will be Kol Nidrei, and the holiest day of the year is going to set upon us. And it's probably the busiest day of the year, uh, or maybe one of the busiest days of the year for me. But I really wanted to prepare my sermon, and I figured the best way to prepare it is with you. And so I don't know exactly how it's going to be delivered tonight. For Kol Nidre, but at least we can give it a try and see how it goes. And maybe you can even give me some feedback. Of course, because the fast is tonight, the most important thing to do today is to eat, stay hydrated. My secret to hydration, pure coconut water, very important. I do about 3 liters of this throughout the day. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'kol nהיה b'dvaro. L'chaim. Let me take you back. It was January 2nd, 1948, a freezing day in Chicago. At the ballroom of the Sheraton Blackstone Hotel. It's buzzing with tension, buzzing with anticipation. The woman at the podium stands resolute, her frame appearing small against the backdrop of such a crucial moment in history. Yet, she commands the attention of every soul in the room. It was the General Assembly of the Council of Jewish Federations and Welfare Funds. I just want to give you the background behind this moment in 1948. The state of Israel has not been born yet. It'll be just a few months before it's declared a state. In Palestine, Jews are surrounded, facing imminent war against 7 invading Arab armies, outnumbered 12 to 1. There's an American arms embargo on Israel. The rifles that they had could probably hold off local attackers, but tanks, artillery, aircraft, for that, the Jewish community needed something they didn't have, and that was money. The underground Haganah and the pre-state Jewish agency had very little money to buy arms on the black market with in a post-World War II world. And there's 700,000 Jews who at the time live in Palestine and right before the state of Israel was born. Many of them Holocaust survivors who had just gone through some of the worst atrocities known to human. And they're all in mortal danger. The American Jewish community wasn't yet fully committed to supporting Israel, either politically or financially. The leaders of the Jewish agency, the pre-state government in Tel Aviv, were deeply distraught. On January evening, just a few weeks before this moment that I want to talk about, they were summoned to hear a report by their treasurer. His name was Eliezer Kaplan. You may have heard this name before. Kaplan had just returned from a fundraising trip in the United States, and it was not successful. His pockets virtually empty. The American Jewish community was actually growing weary of the incessant appeals from their brothers and sisters in Israel. That's what he had said to this group. And the time had come, Kaplan says, for us to face a bitter reality. In no case could they count on more than maybe $5 million from America in the critical months ahead. The The people sitting there, gathered around Kaplan, were shocked. One by one, their glances turned towards the man who had followed Kaplan's report with an ill-disguised impatience, the great David Ben-Gurion. He was better positioned than any of them to understand just how serious were the consequences of Kaplan's report. The rifles and the machine guns which they had purchased could hold back local Arabs who were already attacking, but against the tanks, against artillery, the aircraft, the might of the Arab armies, that would all be useless. However courageous the soldiers might be, it would be useless. Ben-Gurion's plan was to equip a modern army. To carry it out, he needed a minimum of 5 or 6 or maybe even 10 times the $5 million that Kaplan was speaking about. Springing from his seat, he says, "Kaplan, I must leave for the United States immediately and make the Americans realize how serious the situation is." At that moment, there was one woman at that meeting, and she interrupted him. She turns to him and she says, "What you're doing here, Mr. Ben-Gurion, I can't do. But what you propose to do in the United States, I can do. You stay here and let me go to the States and raise the money." Ben-Gurion reddened. He didn't like interruptions, and he definitely didn't like contradictions. The matter was so important. He and Kaplan, he said, should go. This is critical. Other executive members of the Jewish agency who were sitting there, actually, they supported this woman. 2 days later, with no more baggage than a thin spring dress that she wore and the handbag she clutched in her hand, she arrives in New York on a bitter winter's night. Let's go back to our story. January 2nd, 1948. So quick had her departure been that she didn't have the time to even go to Jerusalem to fetch up her clothes. And that evening, the woman who had come to New York to raise millions of dollars had in her purse one $10 bill. When a puzzled customs agent asked her how she intended to support herself in the United States, she replied simply, "I have family here." And there she was, 2 days later, trembling on a podium in Chicago. The great Golda Meir. She found herself facing a distinguished gathering. They were the leaders of the Council of Jewish Federations. They came from 48 states in the Union. Their meeting and her arrival had just been a coincidence. But before her, in one Chicago hotel ballroom, were most of the financial leaders of the American Jewish community, the very people whose assistance she was sent to seek. And for the carpenter's daughter from the Ukraine, the task before her was intimidating, to say the least. She faced the enormous spectrum of American Jewish thought, much of it indifferent, and I would say even hostile to her ideas. Her friends in New York had urged her to avoid this confrontation. The council's leadership was not Zionist. Its members were already under great pressure to fund their own American institutions. They were weary, as Kaplan had discovered when he tried. Yet Golda was determined. Golda heard the Toastmaster announce her name. At the sight of her simple figure, she moves to the speaker's stand. Someone in the crowd murmured, "She looks like a woman from the Bible." And then, without a text, the messenger from Jerusalem began to speak. "You must believe me," she said, "when I tell you that I have not come to the United States solely to prevent 700,000 Jews from being wiped off the face of the earth. During these last years, the Jewish people have lost 6 million. And that would be presumptuous indeed of us to remind the Jews of the world that 700,000 Jews are in danger. That is not the question. If, however, these 700,000 Jews survive, then the Jews of the world will survive with them, and their freedom will be forever assured. But if they do not," Golda said, "if they do not, then there's little doubt that for centuries, there will be almost no Jewish people. There will be almost no Jewish nation. And all our hopes will be smashed." She turns to the audience and she continues, "In a few months, the Jewish state will exist in Palestine. We shall fight for its birth. That is natural. We shall pay for it with our blood. That is normal. The best among us will fall. That is certain. But what is equally certain is that our morale will not waver, no matter how numerous our invaders might be." And then she turns to them and concludes with these words: "It is not for you to decide whether we shall continue our struggle or not. We shall fight. The Jewish community of Palestine will never hang out the white flag before the Mufti of Jerusalem." I'll just tell you, if you don't know, the Mufti of Jerusalem was Hitler's ally. And so I'll repeat her last words. "The Jewish community of Palestine will never hang out the white flag before the Mufti of Jerusalem. But you can decide one thing: whether the victory will be ours or the Mufti's. But you can decide one thing: whether the victory will be ours or the Mufti's." A hush fell over the audience. And for an instant, Golda thought she had failed. And then the entire assembly of men and women rose to a deafening wave of applause, while its echoes still rang through the dining room. The first volunteers scrambled to the platform with their pledges. And before coffee was served, Golda had been promised over $1 million. And it was to be made available in cash immediately. An act without precedent. Men began telephoning their bankers to secure personal loans against their own names for the sums they estimated they'd be able to raise from their communities. And by the time that incredible afternoon was over, Golda was able to telegraph Ben-Gurion her conviction that she'd be able to raise $25 million. Astounded by her Chicago triumph, she set on a cross-country tour at a grueling pace, speaking sometimes 3 or 4 times a day from city to city. She traveled on her pilgrimage, repeating before each of her audience her dramatic plea, eliciting from each the same spontaneous, overwhelmingly generous reaction that she had produced in Chicago. And from each stop, a telegram went back to Tel Aviv, tallying the millions raised during the day. Today, right now, if you Google that Chicago speech, you will see the articles entitled "The Speech That Made the Jewish State Possible." Now, let's jump ahead a couple of years, actually many years, and move ourselves over to Jerusalem. Imagine you're with me. I'm 19 years old, and it's my first ever trip to Israel. Let's picture it. You're standing in a busy downtown Jerusalem street, and you're taking it all in. The Hebrew being spoken everywhere, the diversity of Jews, the easygoing joy of life, so foreign to me. The sounds, the smells of Israel and the Middle East. And suddenly there's a bang, screams. It's in fact the summer of 2001, and the Sparrow restaurant has just been bombed. Just a few months earlier, I'd been in Chicago. That's where I grew up. I was teaching in a special needs school, and the Second Intifada was raging. And although it felt like a distant conflict from my safe spot in the US, I couldn't shake the undercurrent of tension as news from Israel made its way across the globe. One day, my Motorola Razr buzzed, not my beeper. I got a call from a friend. You want to go to Israel for free? I froze. I had never been to Israel before. Neither had my father, and neither had my grandfather. Actually, for generations, the dream of walking the land of our ancestors remained just that, a dream. It sounded too good to be true. There's no way that this is real. A free trip to Israel? Are you crazy? He sent me a link to sign up, and I stared at the screen and reluctantly filled out the form and sent in a $250 deposit, and I was convinced that I'd never see the money again. My parents weren't thrilled about it. They didn't understand why I was willing to take this risk, but something inside of me was ready for an adventure. I was also 19 years old, and I was ready to discover something deeper. I kissed the ground of the Holy Land for the first time. I'll never forget it. Wednesday, October 8th, 2001. Just a few months before 9/11. It was completely surreal. It was my first time outside of the United States in my life. The Sparrow bombing took place the next day, on August 9th. The explosion shook the streets and shattered the hearts of Israelis. Yet the resilience of the people on the ground was incredible. I remember speaking to Israelis throughout that trip, people who had seen terror and violence far too often. And they looked at me with almost a sense of disbelief. They would say something like, "You don't know how good you have it in America. You'll never understand what we're going through here." Their words struck a chord. I had grown up hearing stories of struggles, but to see it, to feel it, to see it firsthand was something entirely different. And yet, even amidst the chaos and the constant fear of violence, the Israeli spirit was unwavering. They carried on with life, proud of their land, proud of their identity. And over the coming years, I would think often of that trip. I never imagined I would ever return. After all, the Israelis were right. I was a diaspora Jew, the child of a diaspora Jew, the grandchild of a diaspora Jew. I spoke Yiddish as my Jewish language, not Hebrew. And really, Israel was in the pages of the Torah, not in the sand under my shoes. The Israeli mentality is so different, and we were miles apart physically and worlds apart emotionally. I thought about it so often. You'll never understand what we're going through here. You'll never understand what we're going through here. Now I'd like to jump forward again in time. Just over a year ago. I'm in bed, but I'm not sleeping. the images, the devastation, the helplessness is keeping me awake. You know what I'm talking about. Those words are reverberating in my mind. You will never understand what we're going through here. I realize maybe I've made a mistake. Maybe I wasn't supposed to accept that as a fact and just give up on the experience of the Jews in the land of Israel because it's just too distant from me, too foreign. Maybe I need to do something that will allow me to understand. But what? What could I do? What could I possibly do for Montreal to help my brothers and sisters in Israel? I start sending out messages. Many of you probably remember that. And with your support, with your help, something incredible began to take shape. With your donations, I filled suitcases with supplies, with gear, military-grade items, basic essentials, things that were desperately needed on the ground. And then I did what can only be described as the most incredible, yet possibly the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I booked a trip to Israel right after October 7th. The logistics were insane. It was impossible to fly directly from Canada. I had to buy two separate tickets, one ticket from Canada to JFK, and then one ticket from JFK to Israel. And so there I was, boarding an El Al flight filled to the brim with reservists. These young men and women were headed to the front lines, filled with a sense of purpose. I was the only civilian on that flight. No big speeches like Golda Meir, no grand moments of rallying for millions of dollars, but I had something just as powerful with me. I had the generosity and the love of our community packed into my suitcases. When I arrived in Israel, I went straight to the people who needed it the most. I personally delivered supplies to soldiers stationed at the Gaza border, handing them much needed gear. These weren't just faceless individuals. They were incredible humans, sons, brothers, daughters, fighting for their lives, fighting for their families, fighting for the safety of our people. I spent time helping clean up the shattered kibbutzim of Be'eri and Kfar Aza, where the horror of what had just happened, just days before, was still raw in the air. I visited the wounded in hospitals, speaking words of comfort, and I attended over 35 shivas, carrying with me an entire suitcase filled with cards that our community had made for them, cards from the children and the families of our community, a tangible expression of our solidarity, of our care. But what struck me the most, more than any of the heartbreak, more than any of the devastation, was the response I received every time I introduced myself. I would say, I'm from Montreal. Every time I got the same response. Montreal? How are you doing there? How's your family? Imagine that. They had just gone through the most devastating attack on Jews since the Holocaust. And their first question was about me, about you. How are you doing in Montreal? We know it's difficult for the Jews there. That's what I heard. They didn't say, you can't understand what we're going through. Something had changed. Somehow, we're all in this together now. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new era, not just for me personally, but for all of us. Before, for Jews in the diaspora, Israel was a distant concept. It was a place of ideals, but also of constant conflict. For Israelis, the diaspora often seemed sheltered, seemed detached from the daily realities of terror, of war, of survival. But something now has shifted. The events of the past year, particularly the tragedy of October 7th, they brought us closer than ever before. Now we understand each other in a way that I believe the previous generations never did. We have a shared pain. Yes, but more importantly, we now share a deeper bond. The lines between us and them have blurred. And what has emerged is a unity of purpose. We in the diaspora are no longer distant spectators. It's hard to get an exact number, but the estimated conservative number is that diaspora Jews over the past year have donated close to $3 billion to Israel. We are part of the story, part of the same pulse, the same beating heart of our people. For so long, we have been the post-Holocaust generation, defined by what was taken from us, by the trauma passed down, by the unspoken fear that it could happen again. But tonight I say it's time for a new chapter. It's time for us no longer to be bound by the past, to step from under its shadow and to forge our own narrative. We are not the kids of Holocaust survivors anymore. We are the adults of Holocaust survivors. We are the adults now. We are the generation that must take the torch and lead the way forward. The world we shape will not only honor the past, but it'll carry us into the future, filled with strength, filled with resilience, and most of all, and most importantly, filled with hope. This is not just a call to action. This is a call to optimism. We must move forward with hope because despite everything, we are a people that are built on hope. When the world said no, we said yes. When the odds were against us, we survived. And not just survived, we thrived. Tonight, we stand at the intersection of history and future. And the decisions we make, the unity we build, will define the Jewish people for generations to come. So let's talk about the future. Not with fear, but with joy, with optimism. Let's imagine a future where Jews in Montreal and New York and Tel Aviv, Massachusetts and Boulder and Jerusalem are not just communities of Jews, but one Jewish community. A future where the strength of our bonds creates opportunities for all of us. Imagine a future where our children don't just know Israel as a distant place, but as part of their story, as part of their identity, regardless of where they live. Imagine a future where our synagogues are not just filled with prayer, but with laughter, with learning, with a vibrant Jewish life. A future where we stand tall, not as survivors of history, but as builders of tomorrow. This is the world that we can create. The world where our collective identity is not shaped by the fear of what has been, but the excitement of what can be. We are resilient, we are innovative, and we are above all united. I want us to leave tonight with a sense of responsibility. Yes, but also with a sense of joy. Joy for the future that is still in our hands to shape. Optimism for the dreams we can still bring to life. And most importantly, hope. Hope that as we enter the new year, we do so not as fractured communities, but as one people, united in purpose, united in heart, and united in the belief that the best is yet to come. We are the adults now. We are the Golda Meirs who have to raise $30 million to save the nation. We do it by being present, by being proactive. Instead of letting our Jewish identity fade to the background, we can be present. We can be proactive. We can take responsibility for our people, for ourselves, and for the next generation. We have to lead them by example, by being Jewish, by thinking Jewish, by acting Jewish. We make a difference to our people all over the world, but particularly in Israel. Israel is the land in which Hashem's eyes are on it, from the beginning of the year until the end of the year. This is not a drill. This is real. We need you, and you, and you, you. Each and every one of you. The Jewish people need you. We need your ideas, and we need your innovation. We need your questions, and we need your doubts. We need your love, and we need your compassion. The Jewish nation is incomplete without you. The Jewish people are incomplete without your unique contribution. So my request to you this year is don't be a passenger. Do something. You can do it here. You can do it somewhere else. You can do it at your local Jewish organization. You can do it at our Jewish organization. We have many events in the booklet, and there will be more. If you have an idea, come talk to us. You don't have to just attend. You can also lead. This isn't it. This isn't an autocracy. This is a community. And as I finish, I want to share with you a song that I grew up with that touches on all of this. It was written by Moshe Yes. You can look him up. He was famous all around the Jewish world when I was a child. I grew up in Chicago, but he lived in Montreal. His son Tully was amongst the founders of our community and shares a very special place in our hearts, though he's moved away. I like to think that when Moshe wrote this song, he was really thinking of Montreal. And don't worry, I don't think I'm going to sing it, but I'm going to recite it for you. It's called My Zadie, and I encourage you to look it up, because there's actually, just recently, Tully put an original version on Spotify of his father singing My Zadie. Moshe Yes, My Zadie. My Zadie lived with us in my parents' home. He used to laugh. He'd put me on his knee, and he spoke about his life in Poland. He spoke, but with a bitter memory. And he spoke about the soldiers who would beat him. They laughed at him. They tore his long black coat. And he spoke about a synagogue that they burnt down, and the crying that was heard beneath the smoke. And the chorus is, but Zadie made us laugh, and Zadie made us sing, and Zadie made a Kiddush Friday night. And Zadie, oh my Zadie, how I loved him so. And Zadie used to teach me wrong from right. His eyes lit up when he would teach me Torah. He taught me every line so carefully. He spoke about our slavery in Egypt and how God took us out to make us free. But winter went by. Summer came along. I went to camp to run and play. And when I came back home, they said, Zadie's gone. And all his books were packed and stored away. I don't know how or why it came to be. It happened slowly over many years. We just stopped being Jewish, like my Zadie was. And no one cared enough to shed a tear. Many winters went by, many summers came along, and now my children sit in front of me. And who will be the Zadie of my children? Who will be their Zadie if not me? Who will be the Zadies of our children? Who will be their Zadies if not me? I wish you all Gamar Chatima Tova. May each of you be blessed for a year of peace, a year of prosperity, a year of endless possibility. Have a very easy fast, a wonderful and meaningful fast. And Hashem should continue to bless everything that you do.